Good morning and welcome to today's live stream. We're so excited to have you here. In just under 5 minutes, we are going to be getting started talking about backyard astrophotography. There is a new moon right around the corner, so we want you guys to be prepped and ready to go. And while we wait for that 5-minute countdown, let us know where you're joining from in the comments below. With just a minute left to go ahead and put your name in the comments below and where you're joining from. We want to kind of see where this live stream's going. It looks like there's about 16 people on the live stream already before we get started. So I want to hear from you. Where are you joining from? Hello again, and good morning for our weekly live stream. I'm so excited that you joined us. I mean, the weather is great out there and we are back here. We are ready to kick off another session. I miss this. I miss doing this every day. I miss you guys. So let's see who is joining us here today. We have Mr. Brad Cohn. Hello from tropical Mentor, Ohio. We have Mr. Jim Summers says, what is up? I was going to drop off my taxes during lunch, but this sounds like a much better option. I 100% agree. We always appreciate you being here. Mr. Mike Vrobel joining us from Copley, Ohio. So those three gents, as well as about 13 others, are joining us today. So thank you, and thanks for taking your time today to spend learning about some astrophotography. So without further ado, I want to bring in my friend and today's co-host for today, Mr. Sean Robinson. How are we doing, my friend?
Doing pretty good, TJ. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Beautiful day down here in Austin, Texas.
Oh, yeah, joining us from Austin, Texas. Beautiful Austin. I love it. It looks like you got to get on the bike a little bit this weekend, go explore around. It looks like there's a lake nearby with some falls or something.
Yeah.
Is that what I saw?
Yeah, there's a huge Lake Travis that's like a good 2.5, 3 hour ride to go all the way around it. So, took some time, got out of the house with my wife, rode on the bike around the lake. It's a good time.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about yourself. And before you do, though, I wish I had one of those little like Grammy-sized trophies, or not the Grammys, but like the Oscars, whatever, big gold trophy to give you for the look. So when he first joined, I'm like, oh, so you're flexing with a virtual background there. He's like, no, I'm flexing with the 50 millimeter. That's just Bocalicious background. So I'm like, wait, you're in a conference room? Because if you look behind him, it looks like a conference table with like black chairs, and it's a TV. No, he's like, that's my bedroom. I'm like, this is by far the best looking, viewer or best looking, teacher that we've had on here. So definitely mad props for that.
Thanks, dude. So
tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from? Well, we know where you're from, but what company are you from? What do you do? And then we'll go ahead and get into today's topic.
Yeah, so my name is Sean Robinson. I'm with Panasonic Lumix USA. I am originally from the Northeast. I'm originally from New Jersey, but moved down to Austin, Texas here a little over a year ago. I work for the sales support team here at Lumix, which up until the whole lockdown thing meant, I'd be out in the stores, primarily out in the west-ish and mountain region. But kind of adapted, worked into these, kind of virtual classes, and you kind of went from there. I'm a college-educated photographer, so I, went to school for it. Worked in photo retail for a number of years, and then jumped over to the manufacturer side. But I'm really excited about this. We get to teach other photographers, new techniques that you guys may not be comfortable with shooting yet, or have always kind of wanted to get into but didn't know where to start, and that being astrophotography is one of my kind of favorite things. This is a cool experience to work with everybody here.
Absolutely. And the astrophotography stuff is interesting because, it's something that you can do in your backyard, or, if you live in a city, you might have to get a little bit further away, but it's something that doesn't require you to line up a model or, do all these, get all this expensive gear in order to do like high-end macro work or anything like this. This is something a lot of times you can do with gear that you already have. So let's go ahead. And while you're getting your presentation set up, I just wanted to make a couple quick announcements, just kind of what's going on here at the store. So first and foremost, we are open at the store from 10 to 7, our normal business hours, 10 to 5 on Saturdays. Right now, we are still closed on Sundays. So if you do have any questions or need anything, we are here at the store to support you. And then also what to expect if you do join us in store is the fact that we are, going through and we are sanitizing everything. We are making sure everybody keeps kind of their social distance. I have my fancy, I've upgraded to a face shield now from Shields Up. So that way I don't have that mask blocking my face. So I've got that ready to rock and roll. So we're just trying to do our part in order to make sure everybody is comfortable while shopping here. And if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't want to shop in store, that is totally fine. We still have curbside pickup and the free shipping on a ton of items available as well. So let's go ahead and get Sean started with the presentation for today. So we are talking about astro and night photography 101. Sean, I will let you take it from here.
All right, cool. Thanks, TJ. Yeah, so astro and night sky photography, it's a fun style of photography to get into if you're from, the day-to-day photography that you do, or the way I use it as a way to actually just escape everything going on, being able to go out and photograph either by yourself or with a small group, adhering to social distancing rulings. It's a super relaxing style. But while it sounds like it could be a relatively easy thing to do, it does take a lot of preparation and a lot of planning to be able to do it effectively and do it efficiently, so that you're minimizing how much frustration may come up while you're out in the field. Like any style of photography, practice does make perfect, and planning is a big part of that, practice for this. So let's see. Typically with this, I like to define what I'm referencing as astro or night sky photography, because when you do a quick online search, you'll see that there's a ton of different sub areas of astrophotography. And for this class, we're primarily talking about a style of capturing starscapes with either long exposures to create star trails or short exposures to maintain stars as pinpoints, for capturing, say, the Milky Way galaxy, or just a general landscape with beautiful night stars or trails, that kind of thing. Through this session, this is a basic entry into astro and night sky photography. So if you're already used to shooting in this style, you may find a lot of the information a little redundant, but hopefully you can pick up something new in the methodology that I use for going out to create these images. We are going to be covering the process of what you should be doing to prep your equipment, to plan your trip out, to maximize the time spent that you're out in the field. I'll give you some recommendations on the cameras from the Panasonic Lumix line that we use that actually have a lot of benefits for astrophotographers, as well as some recommendations on support equipment. And then we'll round it out with some basics of how I recommend editing these kind of images in something like Lightroom. Now, that last part is very subjective, so that's more my style of editing, but that's always up to your personal taste. So let's start with a couple of examples here. So when I talk about astro and night sky photography with shorter exposures, these are kind of two examples as to what I use in that reference. Both of these images were shot with the Lumix S series cameras. So the image on the left with the Lumix S1H, the image on the right shot with the Lumix S1R. And typically that means, you're talking relatively shorter shutter durations with higher ISOs to be able to capture an image that will print incredibly well with pinpoint stars. So this is the more challenging method to capture for astro and night sky photography, because it does become a little more camera dependent on what your high ISO capabilities are, what you're comfortable with shooting on, versus something like this, which are the more long exposure examples, where you're obviously letting the camera capture for a much longer duration in shutter for the purpose of creating those images where the stars are swirling and moving through the landscape. I'll also touch on some of the concepts of different framing and what to look for in your image when you're trying to capture it. So let's start with at square one here, and that's prepping your equipment. So the key for astrophotography, and this will be a recurring theme through this presentation, is preparation. Make sure you're ready to go before you leave the house. And there's a number of things that you want to kind of make a mental checklist of as you're getting ready to go out and do this kind of stuff. So the way I set this up here is, kind of stages. First stage is to look at the camera that you want to go out and use. Now, I have 6 recommendations here from the Panasonic Lumix lineup that I prefer to use for astrophotography, but by no means does this list mean that if you have a camera that's not talked about here, it does not mean that you can't go out and shoot with those cameras. A little bit later on, I'll go into why these are the recommended cameras from the Lumix lineup. But again, you can do this pretty much with any camera that you have within reason. Even some cell phones now talk about astrophotography modes, but you'll see why those aren't really great options for this versus using a real dedicated camera for it. So what that means is with the Lumix S series, so that's our full frame line of cameras, the cameras are the S1, S1H, and S1R. If you're in the 4/3 cameras, my high recommendation in cameras is a GH5, GH5S, or a G9. So once you figure out which camera you want to use, then it's, okay, let's look at what lenses we want to use for this. And if you look at a lot of the traditional imagery that you see for astrophotography, a lot of it is shot in a much wider angle perspective. So some of this, when you start looking at, what optics do you want to use for this, you want to pick as wide as you can go and as fast as you can go. So for something like the S series cameras, my heavy recommendations are something in that 16 to about 50 millimeter range. I usually don't like shooting anything longer than 50 millimeter. So for example, I've shown here the 24 millimeter 1.4, which is from one of the Lumix or the L-Mount Alliance members, a 14 to 24 f2.8, which is also from one of those members, or something like our 16 to 35 f4, for something that's compact, lightweight, and ultra wide. If you're in the micro 4/3 set of cameras, that's where you look at, again, what wide angle lenses are available to you. And in that case, my go-to lenses are the 8 to 18 millimeter 2.8 to f4, and that's one of our Leica lenses, our 12 millimeter f1.4 Summilux, and the 15 millimeter f1.7 Summilux. These are all relatively wide angle lenses in the 15's case. The 8 to 18 and 12 millimeter are ultra wide or wide angle lenses. But a common thread you'll notice with a lot of this glass is that it's fast aperture. So you're having something that's 2.8 or faster, save for the 16 to 35, which is an f4. So you pick the lens for the camera that is going to give you the exposure values that you want for this kind of shooting. And again, I'll cover some of the exposure values in a little bit as well. Now, I see a comment from Jim about a red light in the equipment list. Yeah, so I do touch on that a little bit later. When you start looking at the camera equipment specifically for this conversation, there's a lot you want to look at, but there are a ton of other pieces of equipment that you want to kind of pay attention to benefit you while you're out in the field. And a lot of that, can come down to a red headlamp or some sort of red filtered light for viewing at night. And I'll go into more detail about why red versus a standard flashlight. But when it comes to the camera equipment here, the next thing you want to really pay attention to is your batteries. Now, whether you're shooting a DSLR or you're shooting a mirrorless camera, battery consumption for astrophotography and long exposure is a very critical thing to be aware of. With mirrorless cameras, because they are much more technologically advanced than what typical DSLRs offer, they do consume more battery life than their DSLR counterparts. So what that means is that my base recommendation is always go out with at least 2 fully charged batteries, and that's bare minimum. You want to get yourself in a habit of, while you're preparing your equipment, to kind of put all of this in a checklist. Once you find the camera, cool, you're set. Once you pick the lens you want to use, you're set. Then you look at batteries and, create this checklist. What I typically do is I will have the batteries that I'm going to use for a night out of shooting in a charger ready to go. And nothing that I have for the kit will ever go into my bag until it is fully charged, has memory cards in it, has the lens attached, everything's ready to go. So making sure that you're keeping yourself multiple batteries. When it comes to batteries, you want to be aware of the environment that you're shooting in as well, as Jim also mentions here too. Batteries perform better under warmer climates. Colder climates, you will run into, in some cases, a pretty severe reduction in battery performance. A lot of it just depends on the temperature of the environment you're in, like I said. So if you're someone shooting in colder environments for long exposure night work, that 2 battery minimum should really jump up to, say, like 4 batteries. And even in that case, don't store your batteries just in a bag. Keep them in your pockets. Keep them close to you. If you're wearing a jacket, keep it in your inside pocket so that your body heat keeps the battery warm, or closer to a warmer temperature. Because the colder they get, the less efficient they are, the less time you have shooting with them. If your camera has the capability of being powered externally, like our S-series cameras can be power delivered over USB, you can also look into carrying some sort of USB battery bank, as long as it's a high-powered bank, so something that's 2 amp at minimum. You can connect those into the USB of the camera and charge and power the thing for a much longer period than the internal battery or the standard camera batteries can run for. So check your camera. Some cameras have USB charging, and they're usually very explicit about that it's just USB charging, which won't really help you in this situation because it won't deliver power while you're shooting. But cameras like the S-series, the G9, they offer you, at minimum, power delivery without charge over it. So that's something to look at and kind of consider if your camera has that capabilities. The next thing that I go down on my checklist is the tripod. Which tripod am I going to be using? Am I going to actually go with a standard tripod? Am I going to use something that's more of a lightweight, travel-friendly thing that's like a just simple plate design? Pick the tripod that works for your camera. And this is where the team at Pixel Connection are going to be your best friend when it comes to this. If you're unsure about the support system you're using, whether tripod or kind of portable mount system, check in with them. There are a lot of things about tripods that are heavily misunderstood in the industry about size, weight capacity, what head makes the best sense for your tripod. Is that head actually designed to work with the camera that you're putting on it? So you need to make sure that the camera is, or the tripod rather, is actually spec'd for the equipment that you're putting on it. The last thing you want to do is have a 15-minute exposure ruined because you didn't notice that the tripod started to sag while you were shooting. And now all of those light trails are just ruined and that time's gone. And a point with tripods is make sure you have your tripod plate. A lot of times I've had conversations with photographers where they get out to go do this kind of stuff, or you go out on an excursion when we were doing, actual photo excursions as groups, and you realize that you left that tripod plate somewhere at home. So in that checklist, make sure you're attaching the tripod plate to your camera. I'm a firm believer of attach it to the camera, don't leave it in the tripod. You're less likely to ever forget it if it's on the camera than on the tripod and run the risk of it falling out of the tripod or anything like that. So make sure you have your tripod plate as well. The next thing is obviously memory cards. Make sure that you are stocked with enough memory to actually be able to go out and capture images. Now, depending on the resolution of the camera, that will depend on what card size you really want to be comfortable going with. I am a staunch believer that bare minimum memory card storage should now be around 64 gigs. 20 megapixel cameras, if you're shooting a ton of raw files and JPEGs, and if you're doing the odd video recording as well, you're going to fill that card up relatively quick. If your camera has dual card slots, make sure you have a card in both of those slots. one of the worst feelings is when you go and you get out in on location and you forget a memory card and you don't end up having any of them. That just totally ruins an entire night. And as we'll go over in the next couple of slides, again, with the planning, in some cases you may have to devote a chunk of time to go out and capture these kinds of images. So at least if your camera has 2 cards, always make sure you have 2 cards in there. The S series cameras, for those that are using it, it uses for the S1 and S1R, we use SD UHS2 as well as a CF Express card, or XQD if you have those. The S1H uses dual SD cards, and the G series uses dual SD cards as well. Now, the last thing on this list is your phone. Make sure you have a fully charged mobile device or some sort of communication device that either has cell compatibility, so you can call somebody, but also has good network connection and some sort of map solution so that you can find your way where you have to go, find your way out if you get lost, and plan out the route that you're going to actually go for these trips. Because what you'll see in the next couple slides is some of these places that you're going to want to go to actually be able to capture some of these images could be fairly remote. So making sure that you're staying safe and having some sort of device for emergencies and for planning is key to a lot. So now that you've actually got the camera equipment, the hardware kind of sorted out, now it's actually time to go into planning your shot. So planning where you're going to go, how you want the image to look, what the sky should look like when you get there. And that's where I love using the app PhotoPills. Now, it's available for both iOS and Android. If you're a Windows Phone user, unfortunately, I don't think there's a Windows Phone version. But this app becomes an amazing reference guide for not just astrophotography, but everything from, say, time-lapse, from just pretty much any style of photography and any kind of information you want to learn about it while you're on the go. This becomes an amazing pocket tool for you. So as you can see here, I have a couple screenshots of what the app looks like and what you should expect to see with it. So the first 2 on the left are just what you're greeted with when you open the app. You have a planner, sun planning, moon planning. So it'll tell you, what phase is the moon going to be tonight? Where's the sun going to be in the shot? You have a ton of exposure control calculators and different tools for figuring out hyperfocal distances, stuff like that. But for this purpose, this is where the inbuilt Astro and Night Sky tools are an incredibly useful benefit here. The star spot, which we'll start with, which is, like I said, that's the harder style of Astro and Night Sky photography to get a hold of. The star spot module for this gives you the calculations you need to figure out how long of a shutter can I actually do. So how long of a shutter duration can I do to keep those stars as pinpoint as possible. So what this app does is it lets you actually click in and say, okay, what camera am I using? So in this case, I have the S1 attached here. So I can say I have an S1, which means that it knows that it's a 24 megapixel full frame camera. Then I can go in and put what focal length I'm using. So it doesn't go lens specific, it's just focal length. So in this case, I punched in 14 millimeter because I want a really good wide angle shot. Then I punch in what aperture I'm targeting to use for this image, and it starts the calculations there. The next 2 options on this app are useful for depending on what style and output you want to do for your photo. So the pie chart looking one is a measurement for declination. So declination is what angle you're facing the camera up at the sky, because that will change the calculation for how long of a shutter you can have. And it can also change even vertical and horizontal. So by default, as you first get into this stuff, leaving declination at 0 is an okay thing to do for your first getting out there, just getting comfortable with what you want to shoot. The next section over where it says accurate, this is a incredibly useful toggle for what your output is going to be. Do you want to print these images, or do you want to just share them on social media? When you have it set to accurate, like I have it here, that is basically telling the camera, it's tightening the tolerances on the shutter speed recommendations that are allowed for print purpose. So you don't want to end up having a shot where your shutter speed's just a little bit too long, so the stars start to move. Accurate tightens that up so that the image you're getting is as tack sharp as you can get with as minimal movement in the stars as possible with the inputs that you're given. Now, what you'll see on the bottom here is there are 2 shutter durations being given to you. One is the 500 rule and one is an NPF rule. Now, the reason why it's important to put the camera that you're using into this calculator is because it calculates the information for these 2 values. The classic rule that we've used for astrophotography and night sky kind of, capturing stars is the 500 rule. Now, back in film, this was fine. You still had to count for reciprocity and things like that. But the 500 rule worked fine as, to calculate how long I need to shoot this image for, not accounting for what film you were using. But with a lot of modern digital cameras, especially as we start to go higher and higher resolution, this rule falls apart. You don't end up getting as sharp images as you should be getting because resolution impacts the sharpness of the image, not in a good way for this style of shooting. So that's where the NPF rule comes in. The NPF rule, what that does is it takes the resolution into account for your exposure value. So in this case, you'll see that the 500 rule is saying that with an S1, I could do a 35-second exposure and I should have a really tack sharp image for an accurate print. When in reality, you'll actually take that image and the stars won't look sharp. They'll be blurred because the exposure's gone a little too long. Now, a lot of times it depends on what application and platform you're displaying this image in. In some cases, the 35 seconds could be okay, but I've always erred on using the NPF rule for this. So instead of 35 seconds, you're down to 12 or 13 seconds for a shot. Now, this does have ramifications for your ISO. The shorter the shutter duration, the higher the ISO is that you have to set the camera to. So you can take that into account and play around with both. See which one gives you the image you like better. For this kind of planning, having the ability to kind of predict where the stars are going to be, where, say, the Milky Way is going to be, becomes an amazing tool for preparation. Especially if you're going to an area where you have a vision in your head of how you want a shot to look. You can use the night AR component of PhotoPills to be able to plan out and actually scrub through and say, okay, in this example, at 12:01 a.m. down here in Austin, Texas, I know that the Milky Way is going to be kind of cross-sectioning the sky, kind of on an angle from the south. So if I go to my location during the day and say, okay, well, I like this mountain or this hill here, I love this lake here, and I want to try to capture the Milky Way in reflection with the lake here, I can use the AR of this to plan, okay, if I come back at 12:01 tonight, it's going to be pretty much perfectly aligned where I want it to be. So it means that you're not spending a bunch of time getting out onto a location and then just saying, oh, well, now I got to wait 2 hours, or getting out to a location and finding the worst feeling, or a worse feeling than that, which is I missed my opportunity. The Milky Way is now past where I want it to be for this shot. So using the AR system, it works all day long. You can scrub through and pick out where, what time of night you want to have that set up for. But it also gives you that declination information that we were mentioning before. So when you go in and you dig in through what this app gives you, you can have this while you're on the fly, you've got everything set up and you're using Night AR. When you hold it to the back of the camera and you have your camera positioned for framing, when you look at the back of the camera, it'll give you a readout of the declination on the back of the phone. So it'll tell you what the offsets are for your exposure values. In some cases, it could be a few seconds difference in what the base calculation gives you versus what you actually want to have the shutter speed set to. Now, for those that want to do star trails, the app also has a calculator in here for how long you want to shoot for how long of a star trail you want. Now, in a lot of cases, you'll know, like when you look at some of those images, you'll see the fully circular images of stars. And this calculator can, or this user interface can give you the calculation as to if you want an image that has fully circular star trails in it, you can just scrub through and it'll tell you what it is. And then also account in what angle you're at, whether you're facing north or south. And again, plan that trip out so you're not having to waste time in the field figuring out all this math for you. The next thing that you want to look at after you've kind of figured out, okay, this is where this is the timing that I want to go out and this is how long I need to shoot for, is where do you actually go now to capture these images? Now, this is where the website darkskiesfinder.com has been, or darksightfinder.com has been my best friend for this kind of planning. So I have two maps up here. I have one that's Austin, Texas here, and then I have one that's the Cleveland area. So what you'll see is this map gives you a visual depiction of the light pollution around where you are. So ideally, if you're in the middle of the city, you're not really going to have a great experience going out to capture night skies. And if you look on social media, a lot of people will have a picture of a beautiful downtown scene with this amazing looking, Milky Way sky behind it. Well, those aren't real. Those are composite images in most cases. Using this website in the planning process will let you be able to say, okay, I'm not going to be able to get the image that I want here in town. How far do I have to go to actually be able to get a really clear sky? And what's cool is there's a bunch of different locations and sites for this kind of information. So if you just Google dark skies map or some sort of night sky map, you'll find a ton of them, and they're all relatively close to each other in their measurements. But as you move away from city centers, as you move out into more rural areas, you'll see that you start to get darker and darker skies, to where you can actually go out and look at the sky and see the Milky Way with your vision. Some cases you may find that it may be an hour away. It could be 20 minutes away, usually not just 20 minutes away. But for the most part, to do justice to these kinds of images, you want to get as far away from light pollution as you possibly can. For someone like me down here in Austin, that means about a 3.5-hour drive out into central Texas. When I was in New Jersey, that meant about a 4.5-hour drive out into Pennsylvania. When you go in the Cleveland area, you're a little more limited as you go out into the more rural area. You'll see that you're not really getting into those blues and dark grays for light pollution, which is the better thing to see. But you still have a pretty good area as you look out towards the darker greens. Once you kind of roughly find an area using this map as to where, like, okay, this is roughly where I want to go, that's where using something like Google Maps, ideally Google Maps, has always been my preferred in this case, to actually punch that address in, even if you're just dropping a pin in the location, and while you're at home, setting up navigation for it. What's cool about Google Maps, at least for the Android users, I haven't tested this on iOS, is that it will warn you if you're going to go through an area where you will have spotty cell service. So you can make sure that you're downloading the navigation map for you so that you actually, if you do get lost, you'll know how to get back. You'll also know and be prepared for situations where if you may be out of contact for a little while. Again, these are things that because you're going out of normal time frames for photography, you want to be as prepared as possible. So yeah, finding the location you want, making sure you plug in where you're going to be on your phone so that it's telling you whether or not you're going to have good or bad cell service. Making sure that you download the map, which Google Maps allows you to do for that trip that you're going to make. This way you can get back and forth is going to be a big advantage for you. Now, after using this kind of app and you figured out where you want to go, you've got the camera and everything all squared away, you've got everything in your bag and you're ready to go. The next thing, and usually one of the last things that you want to make sure you've got set, is your triggering system. Are you going to use a cable release? Are you going to use the camera's built-in Wi-Fi or Bluetooth capabilities? Are you going to use the self-timer in the camera? Astrophotography is a long, time-consuming style of photography. So making sure that you have the most efficient way to work in the field is a big benefit for you. With the Lumix cameras, we have one of the most robust Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities of any of the mirrorless cameras and DSLR cameras out there. So it allows you to do a number of things like remote shooting in a very simple, straightforward setup method. So in cameras like the S1, S1R, S1H, GH5, GH5S, and G9, you'll be using the Lumix Sync app, which is the new version of our app that came out. For anyone using the other Lumix cameras in the lineup, so G95, 85, that series, you'll use the Panasonic Image app. Now, both of these apps allow you to connect over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth where it's available in the camera to do a number of things. So you're able to actually remote view through the viewfinder, so the phone becomes your full control for the camera. But you can also, with Bluetooth, have it set up just as a simple wireless remote over Bluetooth. So this is perfect for situations where, say, well, actually, I'll give you a good example. When I was in New Jersey, we would have decent winters. It would get really cold. So I would take a drive out, find the location I was going to shoot at, and it could be like, 10 degrees, 5 degrees out. I don't want to stand outside of my car with a cable release and have to constantly baby the camera back and forth to make sure how did the image look, reviewing the image, did it expose the way I want it to? The wireless capabilities on these cameras have minimal impact on the battery life and longevity of your camera as it is. Now, granted, you're compounding that with cold weather in that case, so you are going to notice battery life being shorter. But what using an app like this meant is that I could actually get the camera set up, have it pointed, framed where I need it to be, and then go sit back in my car and literally control the camera and the exposure on my mobile device instead of having to get in and out of my car constantly to change this exposure value and then click the shutter and then go back in to stay warm. Because again, you could be spending hours out in the field. You don't want to put yourself in a dangerous situation because you're getting too cold. It's important to also stay safe when you're doing this kind of stuff. Now, for situations like down here in Texas, where it's 95 degrees, 106 degrees, we had a couple days ago, this is also equally useful where I can have the camera set up outside of the car and then jump back in the car to the air conditioning so that I'm not overheating and risking heat stroke or overheating, that kind of thing. So the wireless capabilities, when you're using Wi-Fi, gives you that full control over the camera to change exposure values. So aperture, ISO, shutter speed, all of those things can be changed on the phone. But you can also frame the shot and review your images on your phone as well. And say you get that one perfect shot and you can't wait to share it. You can then transfer the RAW and JPEG over to your phone, do some editing to it, and already be ready to post it to social media without the need of coming back to work on a computer. Now that's fun to do, but properly editing on a color calibrated monitor and a real computer will still be better than what mobile devices can do. Now, the side benefit also is that cameras that have Bluetooth capabilities, so again, all the cameras that are listed under the Lumix Sync and most of the cameras under the Image app support, save for the G7, some of the FZ series, and I think that's it, have Bluetooth enabled. So what Bluetooth does is it's even lower power draw than Wi-Fi, and it allows you to actually use the remote shutter control, which literally is just a push button to trigger the shutter, press down and slide down to enable timer, and press the red button to start and stop video record. So it becomes a very simple remote for you. Now, if you don't have one of these cameras, or your camera brand doesn't have wireless or Bluetooth capabilities, that's where cabled releases are still available for your cameras. Most cameras still have some sort of 2.5 millimeter jack input on the side of the camera, or a proprietary connector that'll allow you to actually still remote trigger. And you can get wireless versions of these to balance your system out. But make sure you have something to be able to trigger your camera. If all else fails and you don't have either of those capabilities and you just want to get out and shoot, that's where having, knowing where your self timer is on the camera, or if your camera has an option for shutter delay, will also be able to work in this case too. You want to do as much as you can not touching the camera or giving an opportunity for the camera to have some sort of vibration in it, which is going to shake and cause the image to not be sharp. Hope I actually am in my presentation. There we go. So why do I recommend these 6 cameras from the Lumix line specifically for astro shooting? Well, a lot of it's because they have the added features, because they're the newer generations with newer hardware, that will specifically support astro and nighttime photographers. So aside from the resolution of the cameras, where say an S1 and an S1H are 24 megapixel full frame cameras, they also add our night mode, which, as Jim had mentioned before about red light, the night mode in the Lumix cameras turns the rear display red. So you have no visible blue light coming through the display. You can also change it so that the viewfinder is also red displayed. So it's night. It all is designed to protect your vision at night. If you've ever wondered why cell phones now have like night mode or sleep or like bedtime mode, those things, it's because it's reducing the blue visible light, which, aside from potential health and vision things, your eyes can stay better acclimated to nighttime if you're only viewing the red color spectrum. So while you're shooting, your eyes will become acclimated to the sky and the environment around you, where the camera, the last thing you'd want to have is this bright, full color screen pop up to where now you're blinded and you can't see what's around you anymore. So these 6 cameras all have the night mode capability built into it. The other thing we have is a specific live view mode for low light scenarios. Now, this is different than constant preview. What live view boost does is it boosts the exposure of the display, independent of the exposure of the image or anything that you're seeing there, while allowing the display to actually slow down in refresh rate. So where this becomes useful is if you're in total darkness and you can't see anything, flipping live view boost on to either mode 1 or mode 2, and that's just level of how much screen lag you are going to have depending on how strong it pushes the gain. This will let you actually still frame your pictures without the need of finding some sort of reference point out in the distance that you can focus on. So this becomes an amazing tool for focusing at night as well. Now, to touch on focusing, and I'll get back to the rest of the cameras, to touch on focusing, manual focus is your friend. I don't care what camera brand you have, what camera you're using, manual focus becomes your best friend. That's one of the number one reasons why I suggest the 16-35 here, because the 16-35 has a manual focus clutch, which I can actually rotate, look at the marked distance scale on it, and actually go and say, I want to be at 30 plus feet with my depth of field and know that that's where I want to be. You also have added tools like focus peaking in a number of cameras, which will actually highlight the areas that are in focus. So you'll get like a glistening color on them. And in our case, you can change the colors to actually a good number of colors for which one works best for your vision. So using those focus assist tools and live view boost mean that you're going to actually be able to frame and capture your shot while not having to rely on autofocus, which when focusing on the stars can result in some false positives, whether you're on a phase detect system or you're on a contrast-based system like DFD. The next core thing is that all of these cameras have the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth remote capabilities. So that means I can use full access of everything that the appropriate app offers for those cameras. And when you look at the cameras here, there's a couple things I want to note about why some of these cameras are on the list. So when you look at an S1 or an S1H, they're both 24 megapixel cameras, but there is a difference between the technology in either camera. So the S1 is a standard 24 megapixel, no low pass filtered sensor, which means it's going to be great at high ISO. It's going to be incredibly sharp, and it has all of those other capabilities that we touched on before. But when you look at the S1H, which is more of a cinema-oriented camera, and actually the camera I'm using for the face cam and all of my live streams, that camera has a low-pass filter. So it's 24 megapixels with a low-pass filter. Now, the low-pass filter will actually reduce instances of false color or moire. So in some cases, it may actually be the better choice for you. But on top of that, it has stellar ISO, high ISO performance because it utilizes our dual native ISO circuitry. So that means I can put the S1H at 4000 ISO and not worry about noise coming from a higher ISO value as my base. Now, when you look at, say, an S1R, which is an ultra high resolution camera at 47 megapixels, you'll see that I only give it a good rating for high ISO performance in this particular case. Now, the reason for that is higher resolution cameras typically have not as good high ISO performance as a 24 megapixel variant when you're displaying them at their native resolutions. Of course, you can do astrophotography with an S1R. I've done it numerous times, but your noise values are going to be a little bit higher than what you'll see in a 24 megapixel camera. So it's something to be aware of as to what your output platform is. Do you need the resolution, or do you need a cleaner looking image? Now, when you resize the images all to even, so if you take a 47 megapixel camera and then in Photoshop resize that image to 24 megapixel, you mitigate a vast majority of the ISO issues because your visual resolution is much lower, but something to be aware of. Now, when it comes to the Micro Four Thirds set of cameras, you'll see that 2 of those cameras are 20 megapixel. And in all honesty, between a G9 and a GH5, it's really going to be your choice of ergonomics. Image-wise, you're going to get incredibly similar results from either camera. It just comes down to which one you prefer ergonomic-wise and feature spec-wise. But the GH5S is on this list, which is only a 10.2 megapixel camera. Now, that's on this list because for astrophotography and nighttime photography, specifically in this style, it is immensely better than a number of the other cameras that are out there. Because it is a lower resolution camera means that it's more efficient at gathering light in low light situations because the pixels are larger. So you give up resolution for much better low light performance. And on top of it, the GH5S also incorporates the dual native ISO circuitry that we have in an S1H. So I can shoot at 2500 ISO and it's going to be stellar performing versus, say, a camera that's not using that technology at the same ISO. So when we mentioned about tripods before, tripods and support systems, these are going to be very dependent on your choice, obviously. But the core things you want to make sure of is that the tripod legs are rated for the weight you're going to be putting on the camera or on the tripod. But it doesn't stop there. You also want to make sure that the tripod head that you're using is also rated for the weight of the equipment you're putting on it. Like I said, you don't want to have an issue where the tripod legs may be perfectly spec'd for it, but the tripod head is a little too light duty, and when you go to lock the head down, the camera still sags while you're shooting. This is where the team at Pixel can be an immense help for you in recommending the right tripod and head combination for your style of shooting. Now, a note on the images here, these are just sample images. These are the pieces of equipment I use, but don't let brand really worry you too much. Work with the team at Pixel. They can give you really good recommendations of what will best suit your style of photography and this requirement that you need. So as far as exposure recommendations go, now that you're actually out in the field, you're ready to shoot, what's a good baseline to start at? This is where I explain to a number of people, start at ISO values of anywhere between 2000 to 6400 ISO. Now, this is for the pinpoint stars. So actually looking to capture stars frozen in place. It's a little contradictory to what a lot of us would think when you're doing night photography. You'd want a low ISO for a long shutter speed to just gather as much light, but keep noise down. Well, for this style, you actually have to shoot at higher ISOs so that you can actually pick stars out of the sky. If your ISO sensitivity is too low, you'll actually miss a large portion of the stars in the sky that just don't have enough intensity to actually be captured by the sensor. So typically starting around 2000 to 6400 ISO is going to be a good place to start. As far as aperture value goes, you want to shoot somewhere to start with in, say, like an f2.8. Now, this should help you with most cameras keep that shutter speed close to around 13 seconds. Somewhere in that, anywhere between 10 to 20 seconds is a pretty safe bet for your first outing. But what you'll see is that the combination of your ISO and shutter speed is going to obviously dictate what aperture you want to shoot at, or vice versa. Once you kind of get your ISO range in there and you know what shutter speed you're going to want to be in, that's where you play around with the aperture. Now, this is where an advantage in Micro Four Thirds shows up. If I have a camera set like the two images I have down here, my GH5S at ISO 2500 at f2.8, I got a 20-second exposure. Where the same values, if I had the S1H at 2.8 at 2500 ISO, my shutter speed is going to be immensely longer for that same image. Now, you have that benefit in 4/3 to be able to shoot at lower ISOs with faster apertures because your depth of field isn't as important of a part to have to really look at while you're doing this. A 2.8 aperture on Micro Four Thirds is close to about the depth of field of about an f4. Aside from the equivalency conversation, I'm not going into that. From a depth of field perspective, you're going to get more depth of field at 2.8 on Micro Four Thirds than having to shoot at, say, f4 under the same exposure values on a full frame camera to get the same depth of field. But what you'll also notice here is that the S1H at 12,800 ISO versus the GH5S at 2,500 ISO, there's an immense difference in the number of stars you can pick out in the sky, whether it's, on the East Coast, which the GH5S image is, or the West Coast, which the S1H image is. So higher ISOs mean you're going to pick out a lot more stars out of the sky, within reason. Now, when it comes to editing, this is that super subjective part that I mentioned at the beginning. So editing is always going to be subjective to your personal taste. I am a firm believer that editing for astrophotography should be done to be as natural as possible, not over sharpening, over saturating an image to make it look otherworldly. But that's my style. So what I typically suggest everybody to do is not obviously, since this is a basics class on it, always shoot your camera in RAW. RAW is your best friend for any kind of heavy editing or really any kind of shooting where you know you're going to have to do post-processing on an image. And when it comes to that post-processing, don't just take a even hand at the global edits for an image. Astrophotography, because it's a very complex look, especially if you're doing an image where you want to have foreground and background elements, each part of that image is going to require different edits to keep a normalcy in that image. So work with your radial or gradient filters instead of just doing global exposure changes. Make sure that you've got the right camera color profile applied. Most cameras in Lightroom will actually be able to prompt up and say, you know, I want to shoot camera standard, which is what the camera was shooting at, or natural. I highly recommend not using the Adobe built-in color profiles. They are a generic color profile, so when you load an image in, it's just not going to look that great, and it will need more work. So make sure you have the color profile set as a base to start with. And then look at your white balance. Now, you'll find a lot online about, you know, what white balance should you be using for the night sky. Some of this will come into personal preference. Some will argue for one over the other. But personally, I'm a tungsten kind of shooter for astro shooting in night sky. Primarily because I prefer the bluer sky as opposed to a blackish kind of sky. That just comes down to your style and your look. An easy thing you can do also is if you have some sort of color checker or some sort of color chart that you can use, if you're trying to go for totally true, accurate color under the lighting conditions in that sky, use those. It will take a lot of the, you know, kind of challenge of what color should look like. But ultimately, you want to keep, at least in my opinion, you want to keep the exposures and the image realistic. So that means don't oversaturate, don't oversharpen, don't use dehaze heavy-handedly, and I can't advocate this enough, don't use presets. Presets are great when you're getting into photography. They're a good way to see what, you know, can be done to an image. But ultimately, if you start relying on presets that are either built into Lightroom or out there on the market, your image will just start looking like everybody else's image there. It won't stand out from the crowd. And ultimately, because imagery and photography is obviously a visual medium, you want your style to come through here. So if you find a preset and, you know, you throw it on there and you just export it, it's going to look like every other person's image that came from that similar area. You know, spend some time playing around with the different exposure values, playing around with some saturation and vibrance, things like that. Create the look that is your image instead of just throwing a preset on there. And then, you know, kind of move to the next step of it. You can always save yourself presets where, you know, like, okay, this is how I like my astro images to look. So I'm going to save this look out and then individually tweak them for the next image that comes through. Because presets typically don't account for exposure variance in an image. So once you've got that image kind of set up, you know, I have 3 examples here. The image that we were just showing editing in Lightroom, all the way on the left is just put into Lightroom and exported out as a JPEG from a RAW. Now, these are all shot on the GH5S. The image in the middle is the edits in Lightroom. So that's just the straight edit in Lightroom and export it out as a JPEG. But what you'll see is I have a third example here. Now, this is where retouching comes in. So if you look at the middle image here, it's exposed. It's the way I wanted it to look. It's close to what I saw that night. But there's this annoying yellow sign in the frame. There's some lights in the trees from the houses out in the distance, and they're not my style. I really don't want them there. And I didn't notice them until after I took the shot. This is where throwing it into Photoshop and actually doing some of your edits and doing some spot retouching is perfectly fine in this case. You know, going in, and in this case, I took out that yellow sign. I took out the lights that are in the shaded area in the trees, because I wanted it to be more of a silhouetted image there. So don't be afraid of going in and doing some minor adjustments to an image. Again, I'm not a big advocate for heavy composite images where, you know, I would take this night sky and throw it into the middle of a city. There's nothing wrong with it. That's your style if that's what you like to shoot. But ultimately, you should get these images as accurate to what you saw as you can. With that, that's actually the end of my presentation. So the whole wrap up of getting yourself started with astrophotography.
Right. Absolutely. And I just want to go back and look at a few of the comments that came in. First of all, I never knew you could scroll down in PhotoPill, so nice little tip there. Jim mentioned that Stellarium is a great tool to use before you head out. So it's a nice little Windows app, I believe Windows. He said desktop app that allows you to plan before. So thanks for sharing that, Jim. Overall, I'm going to go into some announcements, but first and foremost, thank you, Sean, for jumping on and sharing all those amazing tips. And, you know, one of my favorite comments that came in was, you know, this is pretty awesome, guys. Would love to see more of this kind of stuff. So, you know, definitely shows that you're resonating with some of our audience. So thank you so much for, you know, joining and helping out today. I really appreciate it. So what questions do we have, guys? I want to, you know, kind of be respectful for Sean's time, but he is here to answer any questions that you might have. So we'll give you a couple minutes to think of a few questions or get them typed out there. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about what's going on over here at the Pixel Connection. We do have our Talking Pixels podcast. So that is something that we put out every, you know, a couple times a month, that we talk about how you can take your hobby to a business, to a career. We don't talk about, you know, the latest gadgets. We don't talk about what's on sale. We just talk about how you can build a business in photography. So definitely take a look at that. My friend Justin Gamble helps me out with that. And we just share kind of the experiences that we've gone through and share resources, how you can get started with that. I want to let you know about Pixel Photo Fest. It is still happening August 14th through 16th. That is, you know, subject to change. And, you know, we're finalizing a couple details with that. And as we have more information about the conference, we will be sure to let you know. We do have a bunch of awesome speakers that will be joining us, whether we do it in person or virtually. We will have all of the, you know, just some of the best educators in the industry. And if you do sign up today using the code Lunch and Learn, you can actually save $100. So that gives you all of those educational sessions for $99. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find such a good deal. If you are interested in more of a one-on-one approach, so let's say you just picked up a new Panasonic camera and you want to sit down and figure out, you know, how to use, you know, 422 10-bit, or you want some more tips on how to get great, you know, night sky photos, that's what the one-on-ones are for. That's where we take and design a course around you, and we can actually do those virtually. So if that's something you're interested, definitely click on the link there. Or if you head over to our Instagram account at the.pixelconnection, if you click the link in the bio, it'll actually take you to the sign up page as well. And if you do need absolutely anything from us, we are available here at the store. So feel free to reach out, whether that's on phone or email or social, and we'll be sure to help you out. So we did have a couple questions that did come in. Are the slides available somewhere? That was a lot of information. So as far as the slides, we do have the video available, and that is available on YouTube as well as our Facebook page. Sean, I don't know, are the slides available, or do you hold on to those?
I typically don't send the slides out because they live on the YouTube platform. So definitely rewatch the video, which is better anyway, because you can actually scroll through and follow along with some of the things other than just taking a slide for face value.
Absolutely. So, Mike, if you do have any individual questions too, just reach out to me one-on-one, and I'll get you connected with Sean as well. Brad Cohn says, can you use high-res mode in some of the Lumix cameras with Astro-Photography?
It's a little challenging to do astrophotography with any high-resolution mode, mainly because your shutter duration is limited to typically around a second. Some cameras do let you go longer, but because of the motion in the stars, because they move through the sky, you're going to run into challenges where you're going to see like multiple stars. You're not going to get a pinpoint image for it. So,
excellent.
Yeah,
great question there. Thanks for asking that, Brad. So if there are no other questions, Sean, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. If anybody needs absolutely anything, we are more than happy to help you out. I hope you guys have an awesome week, and we'll talk to you soon. See you guys.